Inside the X is a short newsletter every Friday designed to give you some fun right before the weekend. It'll include links to blog posts, articles, books, quotes, and recent purchases I've made. Everything is handpicked to add value to your life. To join, email entertainmentxpodcast@gmail.com.
Good morning, Vietnam!
But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward.
To infinity and beyond!
Some people without brains do an awful lot of talking, don't they?
It's classified.
You talking to me?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
I can't fly!
Expecto Patronum!
Entertainment X.
You never know what you're gonna get.
For this episode, I sit down with Phil O'Brien. Phil created West 42nd Street Magazine, which is a magazine publication in Hell's Kitchen, New York. That's how I got in contact with him. He actually has also created one of the largest independently owned sports photography agencies that he sold a while back. So he's got this fascinating journey of photography that brings him across the pond from England to New York City. So we talk about that life path, and we talk about his creation of this magazine and so much more. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and keep on keeping on. We're back with another episode of Entertainment X, and today with me is Phil O'Brien.
Hey, good morning.
Phil, good morning. Okay, we're just going to jump right into this. As a kid, what got you interested in photography?
There's like an exam in the UK, I'm British, which is called the 11 Plus. And one of the things was, if I got a good grade at the 11 Plus, my mum and dad were going to buy me a camera, which they did. So that was the thing and I got this very nice camera, and I'd looked in the catalogue from the chemist shop and whatever else, and that's where I got. And then I put a roll of film in it, and probably over the next year, I used that roll of film a frame at a time on holidays and birthdays and Christmas.
Sparingly?
And whatever, sparingly, yeah, it was expensive stuff.
Well, how old were you?
I was 11, so it's called 11 Plus, and that's when you move up a grade. I think it's like 6th grade here, and you move on to another school.
What got your focus into sports?
Sports was kind of later on, although I was brought up in Liverpool, and Liverpool is a very sporting community. So that's and it's all football. So, and I could hear from my home the sound of the ground when Liverpool were playing in Europe, some German team. You'd hear in the evening the crowd roaring, and you'd know when a goal had been scored, and they were probably 2 miles away. Yeah. But you could hear that. So, and that was part of. And you're in Liverpool, you're either a Liverpool supporter or an Everton supporter. My sister was an Evertonian, and I was a Liverpudlian.
Wow. Okay, so then as you're going into this sports photography world, what did your parents teach you about work ethic?
Well, Dad was a journalist, so he was a production journalist with the Liverpool Echo, which is the big paper there. He worked from when he was 16 there till when he was 65, the day he retired. Wow. He met my mum at the Liverpool Echo. She was on the telephone. She was when they used to connect the phones through. Yeah. So he met her there, and he was always, really hardworking, and he did his production job during the day, and then in the weekends and evenings he'd cover schoolboy football, and a lot of the professional footballers that went through to the top level would say, "Oh, hello, Mr. O'Brien," because they knew that their name in the Liverpool Echo might get them on the register of these pro clubs. And then at the weekend, he'd cover track and field athletics, as we call it in the UK. Yeah. All at a local level. And so he was pretty hardworking. And on a Monday evening after work, you'd hear him dictating his copy over to get it in for whatever he was doing. So, yeah, they were really hardworking. So there was definitely an ethic there.
Yeah. Now, I have to ask, because I'm a personal fan of these as well, model railroads. You're the first person on this show that I've talked to about it. It's like it's a very small known fact about me. I love them. But you sold yours, right?
I sold mine. So one of my big life decisions, that road less traveled,
was
I had that moment where oh, I could be like a civil engineer, or I could be a photographer. I've got this model railway, and it takes up part of my room, and I've got this camera. And luckily, I decided to sell the model railway to get a better camera, rather than sell the camera to get a better model railway. Life might have been very, very different.
It would. No, it would. And I'll never forget this. When I must have been like 13, I went to a model railway store, and I was obsessed. I was with my dad, and we're in there, and the guy behind the counter said, find something else to be obsessed with, otherwise you'll be me. And he's like, you'll own this store, and he's like, if you don't want to do this, go do something. And that was like something in my brain clicked, and I was like, I'll come back to it when I'm older.
That's right, you had that moment too.
Yeah, it's important. No, it's important because that's a good hobby.
Okay, the Hell's Kitchen Model Railway Club, we'll be doing that next week, the two of us.
Oh, really? Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, we'll talk about it. We'll cover
Maybe
that.
not.
No, I didn't know there was one in Hell's Kitchen.
No, there is. We're going to start it.
Oh, we're starting it. I'll take it. I got mine in storage out in Queens. We'll pull them out. It'll be great. Oh my goodness. Okay, so then as you're 18 and you're deciding not to go to university.
Yes.
You're like, I don't want to continue education. Was that just you? Was anyone talking you into that? Was anyone talking you out of it?
No, I mean, at school, there were probably, it was a boys' school, Catholic grammar school, and it was probably 100 students of that year. And all of them were applying to go to university and whatever. And I just wanted to work, and I, in the end, decided I'd do a 1-year course in press photography, which I did. So I did that and moved away the next year. But the other thing I decided during that time when I was studying was, and I should have been revising for the exams, was typing was really important. So I just taught myself how to type. So I got these little pads and these little things and just worked out how to touch type, which I've been able to do since. So I can look around and chat to you and type, which I suppose a lot of people can do these days, but it's very unusual then.
It's a talent, yeah.
Ding! Ding!
Oh my goodness. Okay, so then what did you learn about, and I'm curious about like letter writing, or now it's email writing. What did you learn about communication through print letters, asking for things, or the way you would format a letter? Yeah. Was there anything that stand out in your mind from that?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually did a couple of letters the other week. I bought a typewriter when I came to New York to keep in touch with my daughter in the UK and my son. And I still occasionally type letters. And it's really interesting because you only have one chance. You got one piece of paper. Yeah. Any errors are there, and these days I scribble through them, but in the past I'd have corrected them or even started again. So you had to be fairly precise. If you were typing a letter, when I started my business, I wrote to the 20 picture editors of the national newspapers and Sunday papers, so there's about 25 letters to type, and I typed them all individually. There wasn't any mail merge. So you would do that. God, I feel really old. It wasn't a quilt pal. It was a typewriter.
We'll change the topic.
Even my business plan for the business, which I've still got a copy, is all hand typed, and that's what I would have shown to a bank manager, whatever else. The spreadsheet is handwritten. So the handwritten cash flow. Yeah. Because there was no way of possibly doing a cash flow that wasn't handwritten. There was no Excel, nothing like that then.
You made that business plan by yourself?
This was only like early 1980s. This isn't the 1900s.
No. Yeah, we're only what, 20 years ago, 30 years ago now?
Yeah, maybe a bit more.
40 years. But you made this on your own. You were like, I want to start my own company. I'm going to make this. Were there any quote unquote adults looking at you like, who the heck is this kid?
All thought I was crazy. I mean, I think everybody was slightly in awe because I had a very safe job, and people were like, there were people in that job who, much like my dad, were just waiting for a time, and they were 50-year-old photographers saying, oh, you need to stay here, they got a really good pension, we have a tea break at 10:30 in the morning, I have this many, I know the rota, and I'm like, nah, this isn't enough for me. And then even my best friend, he was going to go into the business with me, and the first bank manager we went to see just said, no. And he called me the next day and said, I think I might join you a bit later if that's okay, Phil. So he got cold feet, bless his soul. Yeah. So that was, but it was, I don't know, for some reason, my parents totally risk averse, worried what anybody would think, wouldn't take any risks. And God knows where I got it from, but I've always been a risk taker.
What have you learned about your like risk tolerance?
I probably have to push myself a bit more to take more risks now because I'm experienced and have a bit of a vision of what can go wrong. Because that's happened occasionally. Maybe more than occasionally. I probably don't get myself so deeply involved in stuff quite so quickly. So that I can't get out of it. So yeah, I think I've learned just to assess a little bit more, but trying not to kill that enthusiasm of this is a bright and shiny new idea and enjoy it and explore it, but maybe not do it straight away.
Yeah.
And you know, and I suppose I've learned that from also mentoring and sometimes professionally advising people where you've got to hold the reins back of somebody who's a bit like me so I can see myself in other people. Okay. But at that time, I was just, God knows why I was so headstrong. But I still haven't worked for anybody since. So that's like from 20 to 21.
So you're doing something right.
Something like that. Yeah.
So then when you decided to create, and I'm jumping back to the beginning of East Midlands
Picture Services. Great name.
When the beginning of that, was there a moment in time where you're like, I can't work for someone else. I have to have my own company. Was that ever a thought in your mind?
I don't think it was. It wasn't entrepreneurial then. It was a drive as a photographer because really it was a different time in terms of I wanted to work for UK is very different than the US in terms of it has 10 national daily papers, 10 national Sunday papers. And as a photographer, that's what you want to work from. And they range from The Sun, which is very tabloid and popular, to The Times, which is much more like the New York Times and serious. And you can work for that range of papers as a photographer, and that's the pride. You want to... and those days, you were judged by, you've got a picture on the front page of the Times. Your name's on the front page of the Times. And in those days, you'd know a check was coming from the Times about a month later because it was all kind of automated. You only rarely took the pictures, got them to them, they published them, they sent you money. It changed a little along the way where that wasn't so easy. Yeah. So it was much more the rights and everything else was much clearer. And so you were able to kind of perform, get paid. That didn't last for very long, but certainly those first 3 or 4 years, that's what I did. Concentrate, look after the bylines, the pictures in the newspapers, and the money will look after itself, and it did.
That's great. Did you have self-doubt?
Strangely, I can't remember it. I think later on, the first few years were good. Sometimes I'd sit in the office in Nottingham, which is in the middle of England, think, is there anything going on today? Am I going to sit here? But somehow there was always something happened. The phone would ring, somebody would want you to go and photograph something, you'd listen to the local radio news and there'd suddenly be, something's happened over there, I'll go and photograph it. So there was I think later on, because going from that being really an enthusiastic photographer with a bit of an ego, wanted to get his pictures in the paper and made some money, to then run the business with lots of people, that was like, there were lots of stresses and times as to, I'm buried, why have I got this many staff? Why can't I pay the bills? Why doesn't my bank manager understand me? All that sort of stuff.
How did you navigate that?
Just by making mistakes, really. All you can do is try and fail, and I can look back. The things I learned along the way. The time management I wrote, which is one of your big things. I remember sitting at the side of a football ground, just before a match, a couple of hours to kill, with a how to get things done book, and just trying to read and say, how do I manage my time better? And other times looking at, the early computers, how can I make these work for my business? It probably took me 10 years before I understood the accounts of the business. I used to just go to the accountant every year and say, is everything okay?
Figure it out.
And he'll go, well, the bank manager's a bit upset. You'd best pay off that overdraft. And then he'd say, on the balance sheet's this and this is that. And I'd be like, glazed over. It wasn't until some time later in the business, maybe 10 or 12 years into the business, where I really started to then get a financial view on the business, probably realized I was more entrepreneur than photographer. And so it's an interesting journey.
Yeah, what age was that?
So I think it was really, so 94, I'd be 32 when I think it dawned on me that this was a business. And that was partly because, this was the era of when this photography business, which I'm talking about, was very kind of cottage industry. And then we had suddenly the arrival of the Getty family, Mark Getty and Getty Images, suddenly acquiring photography businesses big and small. Bill Gates creating a company called Corbis with his own money, which was Getty's competitor. And I was suddenly in this kind of really interesting area with, in those days venture capital wasn't big, but the biggest VC in the UK was knocking on my door saying, "Oh, you've got a very interesting business, Phil. You should really..." And, certainly the guy, Chad, who was there with this company was called 3i, was great, was a mentor, was then, "Let's have a look at your books. Do you realise that per employee, Getty are doing this much per employee, and you're doing this much? Well, how could we make it you're nearer to that?" And he was just great at mentoring, making me look at the business through different eyes. Financially, I'd been looking at it purely product-wise. How do I take great pictures?
Yeah.
Surely if I take great pictures, everything will be all right. Became a bit more customer focused over time, but the financial bit was really through that period then.
What are, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here, if any, some standout lessons that Chad taught you in regards to running a business?
Well, I think one of the best things, and that was a specific time, you kind of think, photography's big now and whatever, but what he did was, he said, "Do you know all this information's available from the stock exchange? You can just go and read, if you've got a business that's something in that sector, so say if you're in a fashion business, or say you're, on Broadway or whatever, you have publicly available accounts that you can go and look at, and annual reports that you can read, and you suddenly get far more info. You always thought, I don't know about those, that they won't tell me, and it's like this public information is just amazingly interesting, and you can have a read and think, that's why they do it like that. They're making this much on that. They're expanding here. And so that made it something that would be, they're heavy documents, but there's some real gems of nuggets. I'm very journalistic. That's probably, I'm more journalistic than photographer. And, so I like digging. I like trying to get the story, what's behind it. So I think he certainly taught me, it's like, let's pull Getty Images. This is when they listed on the stock market. They gave all their information about everything. And I was like, really? Can I have a read of that?
I don't have to go to their building.
That's right.
It's right there.
Yeah, I don't have to read these kind of stories of somebody pricing it. I can actually, see it straight from the horse's mouth. So that was really intriguing. So that was definitely a good win from Chad.
Did you, or do you, as you were making these decisions on selling the company, growing the company, the venture capitalist, the whole thing, or the early forms of that, do you have a decision-making process? Do you weigh pros and cons? Do you follow like the metaphorical gut? Do you consult?
Yeah, I consult quite a bit. I think what I've always found is it's very, very important for me to have a vision, because if I don't have a vision, then I'm kind of down and locked in my own thoughts and whatever else. So it's always important for me to get a vision. And I always tell people, when I was selling the business, which was a big sales process, a lot of money, it was on my shoulders, although I had an advisor. He was great. This guy was called Colin Scotland, and he put it on me. He was like, at the end of the day, it's your company, Phil. You've got to sell it. You've got to do it.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I learned through that process, again, was the vision was I had to keep a vision. If my vision became I'm going to sell the business in the next 2 weeks, it was all going to go bad, because the buyer would move the goalposts and suddenly see that I was so dependent on it. So my work during those 2 weeks, every morning, was getting up and looking in the mirror and saying, I'll walk away today, because actually this is a great business. I can do this with it. I'd like that, but actually this would be as much fun. I would focus on a vision that wasn't on the sale, so that I could walk in the room and say, no, you're just, we're not going to chip on price. We're not going to change the goalpost. This is what it is, because, I've got another life.
I've heard that before. It's like he who cares least wins
Yeah.
in negotiating. You're like, all right, leave it.
That's
Whatever.
right. And but you have to create that vision in your mind. I think it's always for me, whatever I do is the vision, and how does that look? And it doesn't have to be specific. It doesn't have to be. It has to give. It's a vision that gives me energy. That's realistic. It has some meaning. It isn't a vision about, oh, there's a bigger pot of money over there. It's got to be about, oh wow, there's a lot of exciting opportunities here, and I could navigate and surf those and do something special. So
Did empics travel the way you wanted it to? Did it grow the way you wanted it to?
it kind of had different phases because, as you said, at the start it was East Midlands Picture Services. It covered the middle of England for these national newspapers that I talked about. And then what happened, there were a few things happened at the same time. One was I didn't get a passport until I was 25. So in the middle of this business, I was kind of like 5 years in, it's like, never traveled, never been anywhere, haven't had a passport. So I got this passport and suddenly wanted to travel. In the UK, the newspapers deunionised at that time. It was this whole thing of Rupert Murdoch and Wapping and whatever else. And then it all became colour newspapers, and people wanted bright colour in their papers, and that was very, very difficult to transmit. So, and then it became empics. We shortened the name. Empics didn't mean much of anything, but that was the name we used from then on. And yet that was the journey, and suddenly taking pictures internationally. I'd travel 4 months a year, just went everywhere. It was just fantastic, for a young man just doing that. It was a great gig. And did that probably for 6 or 7 years, and then settled back into the business. There came a point in 1994, that year was the first year I used a digital camera, one of the very early ones at the Lillehammer Olympics in Norway, and it was great. It was just like mind-blown, transmitting these pictures at speed without having to process a film in a toilet and dry it under a hand dryer and then take 30 minutes to send a picture over a phone line. It was suddenly magical, and then by then probably had a staff of 25. So it was a reasonably big business, and I had to go back and be a grown-up.
It always comes down to being a grown-up.
I know, that's tough.
Now, okay, so I want to get into some of these logistics with photography, taking photos, and the way you had it set up. My first initial question is taking the picture.
Yeah.
What did you learn about photographing sports events? Is there really it's just like catch the action? Or
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm a news photographer at heart. The sports photography came because I wanted to travel.
Okay. All right.
And sports photography, a lot of it is more like being a fisherman, which I'm not. It's sitting on a box with a camera waiting for stuff to go by. And it's going to happen for 90 minutes at a soccer match or whatever.
Yeah.
The more interesting pictures often for me were about the people and what was going on. So it could be a picture of the crowd. It could be a picture of the manager looking desperate. It's more likely to be something celebration. And one of the things I was always taught as a press photographer, photojournalist was, that it was always these extremes. And I suppose even on strategy these days, I'm the same. But it's always, so it would be arrive early, leave the latest. So that would be a thing as a press photographer. How early can you get there? Because something might be going on. And I remember that there's cricket's not a big thing here, but there's a famous cricketer in the UK who had now a very famous son who's in the England team. I remember arriving early at a cricket match, and there's a picture of this guy walking with his son practicing, and it's been used. It was used in their book as the center, the frontispiece of the book when he did a biography. So it's those sort of things. You arrive early, go late, shoot high, shoot low, get close in or far away. It's always the extremes of life. That was the kind of some of the learnings of sport photography.
And you would use the toilets because there's no windows? What was the reason for choosing that?
Water.
It's the water.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when the big development was processing color film. So you would process a color negative film, like you used to do your holiday snaps on, and then we could take those negatives and put them in a machine, and the machine the ones we used were made in America. They were very early developed out in Boston. I'd come and collect them. They're like $15,000 per suitcase.
It was the suitcase?
Yeah, the Halliburton case. Yeah,
okay.
That's right. So it's like shiny case, weighed like 25 pounds. So heavy, this thing.
Yeah.
And so that was what we'd use, but we had to process the film. And the film didn't need to be processed in the dock because you had these little changing bags where you put your arms in, and they were elasticated, so you could process all the film. But for colour, you needed warm water, and you needed to be near some water, and then you had to rinse the film. So water was important, and then electric, so you could dry the film. So you needed to be. It was always difficult, you needed to be near a phone nut line. You had this very expensive machine that needed to be really dry, and then you had all this wet stuff. So it was really quite pressurized. So I've been in some great toilets around the world. The filthiest was in Calcutta at a cricket ground. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Because you're also, these are negatives, these are film, and you can, for what little people probably know these days about film is you've got to keep them clean, because any dust on it magnifies. So it was amazing how you did your work and kept clean.
So you had to send the color negatives through the phone line.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that it took about 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Uninterrupted phone line. You can't drop the call.
Oh, yeah. And if the call was dropped, it would just be, oh, sorry, it dropped halfway through. Can you start again?
Oh my goodness. And I think it was Bob from the Leaf Industries in Boston.
Yeah, Bob Caspi.
He had the
machine called the LeafX. Yeah.
Now that is that what brought you to the US?
Yeah, it was the first time I came was to Boston. I'd travel in and out of Boston. I'd take one of these machines back. Yeah. He would take my money, and then eventually let me have credit, and I think he regretted it for a while. I did pay him, I think.
Yeah. I think. Oh, sorry for bringing that up. Did he find you, or you found him?
I found him. He was he was developing it with Associated Press. A friend, actually, Jim Gerberich, who's still in AP in New York here, I see occasionally. Huh. So they were developing that together. AP would develop it for the whole organization, but because I was super small, we developed stuff much more tactically. So if AP wanted to use that machine, they'd have to get 50 of them. They'd all have to be the same. They'd have to do the training. Whereas me, it's like, I'll have two. I'll train my mates. Let's get them on the plane. I need to use them in Italy next week. So Bob liked that, and so like in 1990, one of the big developments was this thing of, because how it used to work when it was 30 minutes was it was all analog, so it was a tone. You can hear the machines. They go, woo. You've probably seen them in old movies or something. And that would, if the line breaks, there would be a big line in it. And what happened was like now with our phones and everything else, you put that in one place, you compress it, you send it down a line. And that's what they developed eventually. So that if there was a break in the line, the computer was going, oh, there's a break in the line. I'll come back and do that in a minute, and it won't have an error. And that's what we did. And like, we were doing that with these guys. AP weren't, because it was just a bit too early in the development cycle.
And just for people listening, what we're talking about, I'm going to have to I'll put a picture of this in the show notes so people can see what we're talking about. It's like a checked bag.
Yeah.
And it's literally a computer. Yeah. With a phone.
And a little screen.
And it sends the photos through the phone line. But it's huge.
And the photos gigantic. And I'm still amazed at my lovely iPhone doing its magic these days.
You're like, if I just waited. No,
that's right. Yeah. Totally.
Now, when so you're growing this business. What did you learn about letting go of control of the business, or were you always in control of it, or was there a balance that you had to find?
Yeah. It was difficult because one of the things I had was I employed a number of general managers in the business that didn't work. And that was, I would have a significant contribution to why that didn't work. It wasn't done my way. Mm-hmm. Probably the business wasn't mature enough to have that. In the end, the business began to thrive when Carrie, who was my wife, ex-wife now, but Carrie came into the business and she became the managing director. She started as a marketing director, and then when we'd gone through a number of general managers ourselves, somebody suggested, hey, I tell you what, Phil, why don't you do the business development kind of chairman role and Carrie do the managing director, chief exec role? And then the business flew, because she was just great at making sure everything happened day to day. She didn't confuse the sales staff, because the sales staff would come to me and say, oh, what should I do about this? And I say, but I've just seen this great idea, and why don't we do this like this? And and so I was, once they protected me from the sales team and stopped confusing the hell out of people. I'm better now, a little better. But there was that whole thing. And so in the end, the business moved from, was a very successful licensing business. So we were creating the photography, it'd be licensed to books and advertising, whatever else. We then acquired archive, which I would go off and do. So we'd have the history of sport, which we could then license, which was a really interesting part of the business. I then worked to become a consultant to the sports industry on image rights. I did that for people like Manchester United, UEFA, Royal and Ancient Golf. And that was a really interesting time, because colour mobile phones were coming online and people saying, what are we going to do about this? And then developed a technology, because I was always into tech, and developed a technology about delivering real-time sports photography to mobile phones called Shoot Live. And that was really, the business sold because it was a very successful licensing business with a lot of cash generated, and also it had this super sexy technology for mobile phones, and which we won a national award for that year. So we won the Vodafone award for technology for that.
Why did you say, I think I heard you say that the licensing was really interesting. What made it really interesting?
Well, licensing is great. It's if you're in the entertainment industry, you certainly understand it. If you're in the music industry, you certainly understand it. It's just the retained, that you can make money and again off a picture. You're not selling the picture. You're actually just licensing it each time. Yes, you can use it for the front page of your newspaper. Oh, and then you can use it in the spread for that magazine. Oh, you're doing a review of the year. You can use it again. Oh, there's a book coming out. And so you kept on. The multiple life of the images is really interesting. I still see images now, and I think, oh, I remember that.
That's funny.
Yeah, I don't get any money from it, but luckily I got that in advance.
But then that's counted as an asset when you're selling the company.
Yes, that's right.
That's even right. More.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. So yeah, it's and it was a good time. Photography industry's greatly changed. When I got out, it was just moving that way, where you'll speak to photographers now who would get significant money from licensing from agencies like myself, and now what I used to be selling for $100 might be sold for 50 cents now. There's some silly things going on in licensing, but that's the way it is.
With hiring employees.
Yes.
What did you learn about it? And that's a broad question. What I mean is, did you get better at it? Is that something you would delegate?
Yeah, I never got better at it. I would say that it's definitely a weakness. Well, I think I have this thing that I think my strengths are at the strategic level, having a vision, taking things from everywhere and trying to put the toys together in a special way. So strategic, that's kind of where my brain is. I also will do anything. I deliver the magazine still. I pull a radio fly around Hell's Kitchen. I like seeing people. I'll do whatever needs doing, I will do. Yeah. But the bit in between, the managing, is just, I don't feel I'm good at. I don't feel I motivate. Once it's into that process and it's working, I'm best keeping my hands off it. Mm-hmm. And, much as I was joking about the sales staff, it is definitely that, is to don't confuse the sales staff.
Yeah.
So it's not a strength. And maybe I should apply myself more to it, but there are people much better at it than me.
How's your self-awareness gotten better as you've grown? Because that takes a lot of self-awareness to be like, well, I'm not good at that.
Yeah, it does through, I think self-awareness has got better, but it's, and I think it's now pretty damn good, but that goes for all of my life. It's just trying to understand that stuff, feel stronger in it, keep on learning, but know those, and admit to the things that you're wrong at, and talk confidently about the things that you're good at. So it's
it's very interesting to me. Now I'm sure, and I was reading about it, you've had a lot of standout moments in interactions, people that you meet in your travels, and the one that stands out to me was Was it the little lady with the business cards?
Oh, that's right. So that was, when was that? That was in the early 90s. And I went on assignment to India and arrived in Calcutta late at night. And it was just after the end of apartheid. And South Africa's first venture into international sport again, because they'd been banned, was to go to India and play cricket. And so we arrived late night, went down the next morning, got on a press bus to go off with the team to go to Mother Teresa's convent. So I goes in, bedlam in the streets, bedlam everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just, but loving it. It was just excellent. And I walked in, reasonably well dressed for me, and with my cameras trying to push around to work out what's happening, where are the team going to arrive, where is she, whatever else. And I feel this tug, and I look down, there's this little lady, and she says, "Oh, you're a businessman. Hello, how are you doing? And I'd like to give you my business card." And she passed me this little card, and it was a prayer card, and it was Mother Teresa.
That's insane. That's insane. I mean, you can't make that up.
I know, and I still have the prayer card.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Are there other ones that stand out in your mind without making you rattle off like 50 of them? I'm just curious if any other ones come.
What has been interesting in the time is photographing is you see these people with remarkable energy close up. I was only ever a press photographer, so I never did the I'm going to take a portrait of you and sit them down for a session. Sometimes I did, but not with the bigger people. But I remember probably the two standouts that you really saw that with was Princess Diana, just fabulous charisma. Just when you were in her presence, and I'd often do that just for local papers. She'd be opening a factory and doing whatever else, and you'd be in close proximity and just a presence and just a smile and everything around it, just amazing. And the other one, I was fortunate enough to be in South Africa and met Nelson Mandela, and he was just great. He would spend his time with people. He was present. Again, it's that presence of being with people, no matter if they're so well known or but he had a fantastic energy, great smile, and a lot of pressure on him. And so met some great people. And you see why they're great. Not celebrities. It's interesting. That's a very different thing. Really fabulous human beings.
Yeah, I saw, it must have been over a year now. I saw after his presidency, Barack Obama speak. And he is a speaker.
Yeah.
His energy, and someone was heckling him at this audience, and he's just leans on the podium, says like one line and shuts the whole thing down, and everyone's like hooting and hollering because he's so relaxed.
Yeah.
So that always, I marvel at that.
Yeah, he's another great energy.
Now you, and I read this, and again, this is all from your website, which is great. It's so much information, will be attached to this show. You sold a painting.
Oh, yes.
I want to talk about that because that is, I'm just curious. What are your initial thoughts on it? And then I'm sure questions will come up from it because that was...
Well, when I sold the business, I did various projects in my kind of fun employment stage, as I call it. And one was advising the Duke and Duchess. And the Duke and Duchess have a 350-room castle. And on their estate of 15,000 acres, there's another 350 homes that they rent.
That's a smaller one. No, I'm just kidding.
And I was there last week. It's a beautiful part of the world. It's called Beaver Castle, and Emma, who's a friend, is the Duchess of Rutland. And like all of these English families, if you've watched Downton Abbey, you will know, are asset rich and cash poor, and still are. And during my tenure there, I was there about 3.5 years. One of the things that was apparent was that they needed to release some cash to pay for various things. And they had this set of paintings, and the paintings are amazing. So the paintings are called the Seven Sacraments by Poussin. They were painted in the 1700s, I think. But the Duke of Rutland at the time was advised by Joshua Reynolds, who was a very famous British painter. And Joshua Reynolds said, "You really should have these, Your Grace. They're fantastic." So he wanted them. The Pope denied the exiting Italy. So Joshua Reynolds said, "It's okay." And he got commissioned 7 copies. And the copies were put up and they smuggled them out of Italy. So then the Duke of Rutland had them.
Oh my God.
And then in the early 1800s, one of the paintings was lost in a fire at the castle, and lost is in quotes because they're never quite sure whether it was really lost or somebody took it. In the Second World War, one was sold to the National Gallery in Washington in the US, again because they needed money, and then there were 5 left. And because they were so expensive, they were worth £100 million, so $130 million, these 5 paintings as they were. They had to go to the National Gallery in the UK because that was the only place where they could really be insured. And then eventually it was decided they would sell one. And my role was to sit in between the family who would get very agitated. The Duke in particular didn't like selling off assets. So mine was to, you've decided to do that, Your Grace, I will look after that. And then I would deal with the art world of the Christie's and Sotheby's and art dealers who were equally interesting. And so did that. And we put one of the paintings to auction. Had a great advisor. Went to auction. It was the master sale in December. It was the cover picture of the catalogue. It was the last item for sale. And it went under the hammer for £15 million, and it never reached its reserve price. Oh, and so I'm sat there. So I called the family. They were away. And told them. They're like, oh, I'm sure. Emma was great. She was like, I'm sure it'll sell, Phil. It's fine. You've done everything you can. And sure enough, it did. It sold about 18 months later to a museum down in Texas. So it was sold. But that was my role in this bizarre painting sale.
You can't, like, this is great because you can't make it up. And it's just so, your life is so diverse. What did you learn about human interaction or human emotions with this sale? Does anything come to mind or stand out from it?
I think it was, I think the human interaction, it's quite easy when it's not yours. Because even at the auction house, for example, when it was passed for 15 million, there were still, I think 3, maybe 4 people on the phone. So the art people are coming to me and saying, hey, Phil, the Russians will offer 13, and I'm going, no, it won't go to family. And then, they've put up to 13 and a half. If we do it now, but it's got to be done before midnight. And I'm like, no, I'm not even going to speak to the family. And, you just got to have that confidence. If somebody's delegated you to it's 15 million or nothing, then that's what it is. And that's what happened. That's what it was sold for. So
it takes a lot of confidence.
$22 million in the end.
Oh my God. Okay, so it's slipping my mind right now. You were to that family, you were considered an advisor. So I'd just work. I didn't work full time. It was in the private office, and it was really. Emma's great, and she's chief executive of the estate. I saw her last week when I was in the UK. Just a fantastic energy, and her thing was she had so many opportunities. She had that entrepreneur's problem, and in her position, that problem. Every time she went out for dinner every evening, there was somebody saying, oh, Lord Hobbledybob down there is doing fantastic with his garden centre. And Emma would come back and say, should we have a garden centre because we need the money? And so there'd be that range of things that would come through. And mine was both to help filter directly and then also help her to understand we can't do everything. Some of the things you've tried before. And I was delighted. Last week I went back and she'd opened the engine yard, a big space, as a shopping centre at the bottom of the castle. Beautiful. I told her, no, that's a distraction, can't be done, whatever. And she'd seen it through, over time. Super place, well done, busy, looks like it's going to make money, be a successful venture. And she's learned so much, and it was delightful to see. Because that's what, one of those, the misery of choice with somebody like that. And also, they've got money, but it can go very quick. Yeah, well, yeah. So how have you gotten better at saying no to things?
Probably personally not that good. I need somebody like me on the other side of me. Yeah, no, I'm definitely. Even this morning, I was on my email. I think there were 2 things this morning before 9 o'clock. It was like, I've got over-involved in that. Why have I just done that? Why have I just offered to do that? I've got a really busy day. I'm just on, and like, yes. So okay. You never quite learn, but I think you recognise it more quickly. And I think there's quite a few things I would reverse her out of and say, hey, I'm sorry, I said I was going to do that.
But-
and then you just learn all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have a favorite failure or apparent failure that set you up for success?
How long we got?
As much time as you need. I know you're...
all those failures.
Yeah, right. Well, you learn the most from them, I think.
I think it's starting off on ventures, although it's difficult. There's been various things, you know. It's like even with the magazine. Well, you're 4 years in today with the magazine, and you know you often can look and say, "Why did I start that?" And I think it's the you know, why do you start on certain days? You know, it's not an overriding feeling, but certain days, why did I start that? There's been other ventures where I think, but I just think it's part of the journey. Probably do less starting these days. Very careful about what I start. So failure would probably be starting, and I'm getting better at that.
Yeah.
And definitely getting involved in the little stuff for distraction. It was interesting yesterday in my mail, Rachel, who I mentioned, we're at the Artist Cooperative, and Rachel writes a great newsletter every week, and that was about, she said, life isn't about time management, it's about attention management. And it was about managing the distractions. I'm very easily distracted. It's very creative, apparently, which is my justification, but it's managing the distractions.
Yeah. Time management. I hope this is not a sore subject.
No. It's a good subject. I think I'm probably a reasonable time manager.
Yeah.
I have a little too much leeway by being an entrepreneur, so I can justify, you know, I haven't got somebody who's closing in the walls and that I've got to make it work. So I think that's, I have somebody, so Ruth, who's the editor of the magazine, is a fantastic time manager. God knows how she manages to get this magazine out every month at the content that's in it, whatever else. She's a great time manager. I let it drift a bit. With the excuse of being creative. I can get really good at it. When I need to, I can get really excellent at it. But that usually takes a lot of stress and pressure. I like to do lists. Sometimes I drift from that. And you can tell when I'm really stressed when I start Googling for time management software or list management software.
Have you found one?
My default these days is to go to Remember the Milk and then type everything in there and then use it for probably a month or so and think, this is great, I finally got over it, and then I'll drift away from it, and a year later I'll be Googling for
looking for
list software. I'm using more these days of blocking time in Google Calendar, so I use the calendar a lot, and if I just think, you know, like, they asked me to do that, and I'll just block 10 o'clock tomorrow, do that.
Yeah.
I might not do it, but I know it's in my nag list, and I'll move it around my calendar for a little while.
Do you journal a lot?
I go through phases of it. I probably do it more emotionally. I think that the journal would be more about my personal stuff. And it was funny, when I moved to New York 6 years ago, I started a Google Docs journal. And I thought, this is great. And then a while ago, I'd gone through some personal stuff, quite difficult. And somebody said, what you need to do now is go and journal. And, you know, that would really help you. And I thought, I'll go and do that again. And I read the 3 days that I did it 6 years ago, which was really useful. I just thought, wow, did I arrive in New York? And that was what I was doing and whatever else. So the journaling was good. And I probably then did it on and off for about 5 months at the start of this year, and really was very useful. The trouble is, when I get home from the pub late at night, it's just not good, so I can't journal at the end of the day. That's the problem.
Yeah, no, I understand. I do understand that. Okay, so let's hop over here to the West 42nd Street magazine.
Yeah. The
creation of it. Why?
Well, there's a couple of stories. Well, one is so when I landed in New York 6 years ago, I landed at the corner of 37th and 9th in a place on the map that said it was somewhere between Chelsea and Clinton. which is what I call Hell's Kitchen these days. And then when I decided, I was here for 2 months, decided to stay, and then I moved to the end of 42nd Street. I lived at River Place on 42nd and the West Side Highway, and when I came from 37th and 9th, I wondered where the hell it was, because it was just like, I'd not been that far away from Midtown. Yeah. And one of my friends, who's a very good friend, she lives in Brooklyn, loves Brooklyn. She was like, "Oh, Phil, why the hell do you want to live there? You know, it's a long way from the subway. It's cold in the winter, and there's nothing to do. Yeah. Nothing to do." And I'm like, "Whoa!" It got my heckles up, and I was like, "Okay." So that was in me, and then probably within a year, when I was here, I was looking to invest or create businesses in New York. So, and I tried a couple of things, but then a friend of a friend was coming out of publishing in the UK. He was a launch editor, and we got on well. I looked at a couple of ventures in the UK with him, and then I said, "Oh, I live in this area. It's kind of west of 8th Avenue. I think some people call it Hell's Kitchen or Midtown West. There's this new place called Gotham West. Maybe that's what it's going to be called. It's the West Side, and there's no media, but it's got all these new high-rise rental apartments. There's this place Hudson Yards come in." And so we decided, for whatever reason, to launch a magazine. He was the creator, so if you've seen the magazine, the format, the illustration, the paper, he took so much time over the paper. Everybody picks up the magazine and says, "Oh, I love the paper."
That was my first thought.
This is down to Simon. So Simon Crane, he was great. And so Simon came as the launch editor, and that was in July, just over 4 years ago. And then this day, November the 13th, 4 years ago, we issued our first print publication, which was about the rise of Hell's Kitchen. Yeah. And it was, and I always remember, so the night before, all the boxes of magazines arrived at the storage on the west side, and I can't remember, I think it was 18,000 we printed. And I said to Simon, we got them out of the van, and I was just like, "So what are we going to do with them, Simon? You're the launch editor." He says, "Yeah, I'm a launch editor, Phil." I've got no idea.
That's where my job ends. Here you are.
Yeah, but he did get in the car with people, and he was giving them out and putting them whatever. But we managed to, and we now have a really super efficient way of getting the magazines out. And if you're around Hell's Kitchen, and also in Midtown now, in all the kind of boxes at Grand Central Terminal and 34th Street Partnership and Bryant Park, and we want to be all around the city, because although our base is in Hell's Kitchen, you know, we really feel it's a voice. It's about newcomers to New York. You know, really the voice is there. It's welcoming. We don't do the fear of missing out stuff. As you know, I used to, when I moved here, I stopped getting time out because it used to make me stressed. I used to feel really bad that, "Oh, I've missed that exhibition. Oh, that was on at the Met and I didn't go, and I'm a bad New Yorker." I'm a bad New Yorker. That's right. So we try not to do any of that. So that was, anyway, back to that. That was the motivation. My friend Ashley and then Simon coming on board, and he created a wonderful package. And then for most of the issues, then Ruth became the editor and the actor, and she's been making the voice, because it was a beautiful package, and she's got it so that we always tell the story through people. So if you look at the magazine, it's about telling the story through people. We don't say, "Oh, there's a great show, there's a great restaurant." It's like, "Oh, look at this guy who works behind the bar. Oh, look at this guy who's on the stage." You know, it's always about the people. That's what we're interested in. It's my passion, and it's certainly Ruth's passion. So
I love that, and I love the map. At the back.
I like the map. It's a little obsession. It's like a railway map. We get back to that.
Everything revolves around the model railways. No, because when I picked it up, there's a pub up on 72nd that I like to go to, and it was in the issue, and I was like, "Oh, okay, this is legitimate."
Yeah.
the way we gauge things, but it really is a great magazine. And I found it more recently at Schmackery's. So you guys have it.
Yeah, I mean, we do it's around 1,000 places, and it's in around 120 luxury buildings, so we deliver to a lot of residences. And we did a survey end of last year, and it was like 78% of people read it at home. A lot of people collect it, which is great. You see these collectors occasionally on Instagram, will suddenly get a picture of somebody laid out all their collection on the floor, and then you start getting requests for people. Oh, have you got copy 7? I'm missing it.
Well, they're like art. They are like art pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that is that intentional. The cover to be so.
Yeah, it was always illustration. Even though I come from a photography background, I was always being insistent. I like the illustrated cover. I think there's a bit of a tip of the hat to New Yorker magazine in that, but it's much more modern. We're in a 30-something audience is our core.
Yeah.
New Yorker's obviously much older and also much longer articles. We haven't got the patience to either write or read those. But interestingly, New Yorker started on 47th between 9th and 10th. So it's got a history of creating great magazines in Hell's Kitchen. Yeah, so New Yorker started here.
That's so interesting. Okay. So as we're wrapping up here, I do have a few final questions for you. How have you gotten better at asking questions? Or have you?
No, I've not, and it's interesting. Somebody was saying to me the other day, he says, I was asking you questions, you never ask questions. And I said, but you tell me anything you want to tell me, and you talk. And she says, oh yeah, I do tell you lots. And it's one of my things. I think it's interesting because you see the discipline, say, of Ruth as an interviewer, and she's a great interviewer, and she's done the preparation, she's got the questions she's got on hand, and it's, whereas me, it's, there's just a way of people will talk, and I'll say a few things, and then they'll talk, and so I tend to listen. And I get a lot out of people that way. And maybe and there's a bit of, I'm British and I'm not that direct, I'll go around the houses before asking anything. So I think there's a bit of that. So I'm not that bothered that I don't ask a lot of questions, because I do tend to get a lot out of people anyway.
Why do you think that is?
It's Svengali.
Oh, that's what it is.
Right. That's what it is.
Is that conscience? Like, are you consciously doing that?
No, I'm not consciously doing that. But I think people, I really believe in this energy of people. So you can automatically, I automatically feel when I meet somebody, I think, oh, I'm going to get on with you. And I think people will relax with me. If they get my energy, then they'll relax and they'll want to share, and I can build. It's interesting. I think part of it is the journalistic training, because if you go all the way back to me being a news photographer, which is where I started, I was going into difficult environments and building trust very quickly, and I had to build trust even quicker. The journalist, the writer, could be like, oh, and I saw this had happened, and this was whatever, and somebody also said to another newspaper, and here's their quote. I had to take a picture. So in amongst all that building of trust, I then had to do the ask of, oh, and do you mind if I take a picture? Which maybe it's slightly easier today. Well, people would probably want a stylist along if they were having the picture taken. Yeah. But there was definitely a protection of, oh, I don't know whether I want my picture taken. My only job was really to get a picture, but I had to build up trust, and that could be in a disaster, that could be when somebody was bereaved, that could have been any number of things. So I think there's something in me that wants to build that trust quickly, and not in a cynical way to just get my job done. It's in a compassionate and empathetic way. Yeah.
I want to cover for a second relationships and connecting people and being like a bee that cross-pollinates. That's a passion of yours?
Yeah, it is. I didn't quite realize it was until I read Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. And I think it's a couple of chapters in, and there's suddenly like, oh, and there's this sort of people, and there's connectors. And I went, oh, wow, that's me. Oh, I'd not heard that before. And so that was a real revelation. And it's funny, I wrote to Malcolm Gladwell, and he replied, and I said, have you, this is great, and I'm a connector, and do you know what percentage of people are connectors? And he wrote back and says, no, I don't, but it's a really interesting question. I'd love to know. And I don't know, there's certain people that just get an energy from connecting, and I'm certainly one of them. And and if you read his book, there's an interest in, some interesting stories about that role, and how when anybody looks at their personal relationships as to how they can usually route back to one or two people, and you found the connector in your group. And it's you don't quite know who they are. And there's a lot of people who are transactional, you know, and you look at the dating apps, that's all transactional connection. Mine is, you know, as we talked just before we came online, was about that, you know, it's this bee roll, you know, it's the going about as the busy bee from cross-pollinating. I thrive on it. It's my energy. I get energy from it.
Yeah. No, I think it's absolutely wonderful because people are your best resource.
Yeah, they are. Best asset.
Best asset. Do you have most gifted books or favorite books?
Put me on the spot there.
Oh, no, The Tipping Point.
Yeah, The Tipping Point I definitely liked. No,
I'm just interested. Like Seth Godin was one of the first authors that I brought up.
Well, Seth Godin, I read his blog every day. It's a good blog. I've just had his new book delivered. It's in the pigeonhole outside. Apparently, Amazon just sent me a note.
Perfect.
I haven't picked it up yet. No, I definitely love his books. Interested in the UK last week. I listened twice because I was driving around to Tribes by Seth Godin. Yeah. And I listened. I've read it before, but I listened to it twice again. I think it's a super relevant book to today. So yeah, Tribes would be definitely, and they're by Seth Godin.
His first one that I read was Get What You Deserve, that he co-wrote with, was it Mark Levinson, I think? And they did it together, and that was like one of the ones where I was lifeguarding, and I was like, I want to learn something when the pool's empty. Yeah. And that's the one that came off the library shelf. And then it was like Tim Ferriss, and then the rest is history.
Yeah. Tim Ferriss is great.
There's a whole world of that information for your life kind of thing.
But I like the fact that with Seth Godin, you just every day he's just pushing me to rethink. He has a great perspective. The other guy who I read weekly as well is Chris Brogan, and he did a book on trust, which I really like. The trust something I can't remember, but it's co-author. But Chris Brogan is great. Okay. And again, he just does a weekly email, which I love to read.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. This is great. Oh, one last thing I want to talk about. I want to cover. I promise we're wrapping up, and we just came in an hour. Shuffleboard. I wasn't gonna let you miss that one. I got to bring it up.
Yeah. So
Brooklyn.
So starting in Brooklyn. This is down to my friend Ashley. So she runs the Royal Palm Shuffleboard Club in Gowanus, and it started about 5 years ago. We became friends, and when they were trying to open the place, and much like anywhere you're trying to open in New York, it was delayed and whatever, and I was there. I helped her paint some of the benches, put the tables together, and then her and Jonathan, her partner, opened this 10-lane shuffleboard palace in Brooklyn. It's really cool. I love it. And I would go, I'd take friends, I'd show them how to play it. And actually, when I was doing this, when they were getting ready, the first court, I had a little game on in my boiler suit and whatever. And so that was my history with shuffleboard. And I thought they were mad. You know, they said, do you want to invest? And no, I'll put my name on one of the cocktails or something. But I didn't want to invest, which I regret now because it's a super business. And I'd go along for the next 2 years. It was just like, hey, this is how you play it. I'll go and have a beer and watch you, and didn't get involved. And then Ashley was like, oh, one of the British team isn't very well in the World Championships. Do you think you could play at the last minute? And I was like, okay. And then the guy was fine. And they said, oh, well, the next year we want you to play because there's a team of 6 that year. So 3 years ago, I went down to Florida and played in the World Shuffleboard Championships. It was great. It's a big thing. There's about 10 countries that compete in it. And I won one match against a guy from Bolivia. Which I was pretty proud of, that I didn't get a 0. And then this year I went up to Canada, to Alberta. So for my second World Championships for the UK, there were only 4 of us in the team. My ambition was to get 2 games that I'd win, and I won 4 matches. And these matches take like an hour and 45 minutes later. And to paint a picture, Brooklyn, I increase the average age by about 25 because it's all young hipsters. When I go to the World Championships, I lower it by 30 years because it's 80 plus. And so it's And so went to Alberta this year, won 4 matches. My colleagues in the British team won 3, the other 3, so I'm the best Brit. But I've got to add to that, we were last, so we are the Eddie the Eagle of shuffleboard. But I'm off to Austria next year and Australia the next year to play, and it's such fun. They're lovely people. It's a really good game, and definitely go out to Brooklyn. It's really fun. Or in Chicago. They just opened in Chicago, the Royal Palms in Chicago. So.
In all your travels across the world, do you have a favorite destination? Is it impossible to pick?
Well, I've just been back to the Vale of Belvoir, which I loved, which is where in the centre of England. But in kind of international travels, I did love Cuba. I've been a couple of times, and Cuba was just fascinating. I went probably 30 odd years ago. To be 25 years ago, and it was just really interesting being in Miami in America and then going across to Cuba at that time and just seeing the difference of how humans are and marketing isn't and how things work. It's fascinating. Beautiful country, lovely people. So
did you enjoy like the beaches, the cafes, the streets?
Well, the first time I went, it was the World Athletics Championships, and I would go and photograph the track and field during the day, during the evening, and then during the day I'd walk around with my cameras, which again, that was a contrast to Miami. I'd be mad to walk around Miami with my cameras, but I'd just walk around my cameras, I'd photograph, and people would come up and say, hey, have you got a dollar or some gum? And I'd say, no, I haven't brought anything. No, that's fine, what you do? And they'd chat away. And that was in the town in Old Havana. And then I went 2 years ago on holiday and did the beaches, which was very much like any other beach. Havana's the interesting place, really, really intriguing place. A little time capsule. It makes you think. I always love other perspectives, and it's one of those places where you kind of get that time capsule plus different politics, plus different culture, plus human beings that are, just warm and wonderful. It's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, that I have to travel more.
Yes, on your bucket list.
It's coming, and now it's been recorded, so it'll happen. I usually wrap these up with a billboard quote or word or phrase. Metaphorically speaking, is there a word or phrase that you'd put on a billboard for millions of people to see? Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think be open, get out and meet people.
Be open, get out and meet people. That's great. Yeah, it's what you're doing. And this conversation has been absolutely wonderful. I really appreciate you sitting down and talking with me today. This is just, I didn't realize it when I reached out to you about, obviously, West 42nd Street, that the conversation would, be fun. And then I saw the model railway, and I was like, oh, this guy, he's good people.
People are going to say, what's this got to do with entertainment again?
No, I know. But it does. It really does, though. That was the whole thing with we'll talk about it after. I've said it enough on here. It has a lot to do with it, but... Phil, thank you so much for doing this.
Hey, thank you. It was fun.
It's been a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Phil O'Brien.
You've been listening to Entertainment X, the podcast. You can follow Entertainment X on Instagram at _EntertainmentX_. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join Clay next week for another curiosity conversation on Entertainment X. Thank you for listening.